The cleaner's autistic baby avoided contact with everyone until she met the millionaire. In the middle of the night, she sneaked into an office and, in complete silence, climbed onto the back of the most powerful man in the company. That simple gesture froze the entire room, and no one could ignore what was about to be revealed. In that moment, something so intimate and embarrassing surfaced that even he couldn't deny it. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The night fell over New York City with that typical haste of winter days when the sky seems to give up early and leaves the city to its own lights. Marianne watched from the window of the crowded bus, the tired reflection of her own face mixing with the passing streetlights. At 26, she carried a weight on her shoulders that seemed to belong to someone much older. Her brown eyes, once bright and full to have dreams, now revealed an exhaustion that came from deep within, from that part of the soul that can't rest even in sleep. On her lap, wrapped in a coat that was far too large, Sophia slept with a soft, rhythmic breath. The little girl was a year and a half old, with straight brown hair that fell over her small face, and a serene expression that contrasted with the turmoil of the world around her. Marianne hugged her daughter against her chest, feeling the warmth of that fragile little body, and closed her eyes for a moment. If she could stop time, she would do it now. But time doesn't stop for those who need to work, for those with overdue bills and eviction notices hanging on the door. The commercial building where she worked was on Park Avenue, that pulsating artery of the city that never completely sleeps. At 8 in the evening, when Marianne got off the bus holding Sophia in her arms, the hustle was still intense. Executives leaving work late, young people heading to bars and restaurants, valets waving at drivers. She hurried across the street, her heavy bag bumping against her hip, and entered through the building's service door. Her heart was racing. This was against all the rules. Bringing her daughter to work could cost her the job, the only thing still keeping her afloat. But what else could she do? The neighbor who sometimes watched Sophia was in the hospital, and there was no one else. The daycare that offered a night shift cost triple what she could afford. And today, of all days, her supervisor had called, asking her to cover the shift of another employee who hadn't shown up. They asked, but Marianne knew it was practically an order. Those who say no lose their spot on the next overtime schedule, and she needed those extra hours like she needed air to breathe. The service elevator ascended slowly, rattling and shaking as it always did. Sophia began to stir, bothered by the metallic sound. Marianne rocked her gently, whispering words she didn't even understand herself, just comforting sounds that came from instinct. The girl had a different kind of sensitivity since birth. Loud noises scared her, bright lights irritated her, and sudden changes in environment made her anxious. The pediatrician at the community health clinic had suggested a more thorough evaluation, mentioning traits that could indicate autism, but Marianne couldn't afford private specialists, and the public system's waiting list hadn't moved in months. The 22nd floor was always quiet at this hour. The companies closed at 6, 7 at the latest. The cleaning work began afterward, when everyone else had gone home. It was a tacit agreement. The cleaning staff were invisible, doing their work when no one else was there to see them. Marianne liked this invisibility. It meant she could work in peace without judgmental looks, without having to smile at people who barely acknowledged her existence. She knew every corner of that floor. The company occupying the entire space was a large construction firm, one of those that plastered billboards all over the city with promises of luxurious developments. Marianne cleaned the executive restrooms, the meeting rooms with imported glass tables, the hallways with beige carpet that showed every speck of dust. She wiped the windows that overlooked the illuminated city, the shelves full of trophies and framed certificates, the leather chairs that cost more than her 6-month salary. Today, however, there was a problem. Marianne needed to find a safe place for Sophia while she worked. She walked the corridors with the girl in her arms, weighing the options. The file room was too cold. The break room had a constant flow of security guards stopping for coffee. The restrooms were out of the question. It was then that she remembered the old locker room at the end of the east corridor, a space that had been decommissioned after a new, more modern one was built. No one ever went there. It was perfect. The locker room was dark and smelled of mildew. Marianne turned on the light and looked around. There were old lockers against the walls, 2 wooden benches, and in the corner a pile of clean blankets that were occasionally used for company events. She improvised a cozy little corner, spreading blankets on the floor, creating a sort of soft nest. From her bag, she took out the small flashlight she always carried and positioned it so the light was soft and indirect, just the way Sophia needed it. She had also brought her daughter's favorite cloth doll, the one she never slept without, and a bottle of milk. Sophia was almost asleep again. Marianne laid her down carefully, covered her with another light blanket, and stood there for a few minutes watching the girl's peaceful breathing. Her chest was tight, tears threatening to fall. What kind of mother was she, leaving her daughter alone in an abandoned locker room? But what choice did she have? Guilt was a weight Marianne carried every day with every decision she had to make. Guilt for not being able to give Sophia a better life. Guilt for not having managed to keep her father around. Guilt for every minute she wasn't present. She closed the locker room door carefully, double-checking that it was only pushed shut, and not locked from the inside. Sophia was safe there. No one passed through that corridor. In 2 hours, 3 at most, she would finish her work and come back for the girl. Everything would be fine. It had to be fine. The work began as usual. Marianne pushed the cleaning cart through the hallways, vacuumed the carpets, emptied the trash cans, wiped down the desks. Every movement was automatic, repeated so many times that her body knew what to do without her mind needing to think much. But today her mind was far away, trapped in that dark locker room, wondering if Sophia would wake up scared, if she would cry without anyone hearing. It was almost 10 o'clock when she heard voices in the main corridor. Marianne frowned. It wasn't normal for people to be in the office at this hour. She approached discreetly and saw lights on in the large conference room. Through the glass door she could see several men in suits, some sitting, others standing, all with serious expressions. An emergency meeting, it seemed. She went back to her work, trying not to think about it. But then something happened. One of the security guards hurried down the corridor and, without looking where he was going, locked a few doors he found open along the way. It was standard security procedure during important meetings to close off unnecessary access points. Marianne heard the sound of keys turning, of doors clicking shut, and a chill ran down her spine. She dropped everything and ran to the east corridor. Her heart hammered in her chest as her footsteps echoed in the silence. "Please, please, please," she repeated mentally. But when she reached the locker room door and tried to open it, the handle wouldn't turn. Locked. The door was locked from the outside. Her hands trembled as she shook the handle, pushed the door, tried to force it. Nothing. She pressed her ear to the wood and could hear, very faintly, a muffled cry. Sophia had woken up and was crying, alone, in the dark, locked in. Desperation washed over Marianne like a wave that drags everything away. She banged on the door, called for her daughter, tried to force it again. Tears streamed down her face as her whole body shook. She needed to find the key. She needed to get Sophia out of there. How could she have been so irresponsible? How could she have put her daughter in such danger? She ran through the corridors looking for the security guard, but he had already gone down to the ground floor. The supervisor's office was empty. All the other cleaning staff was scattered on other floors. Marianne was alone and her daughter was trapped, crying, terrified. That's when Mrs. Celia appeared in the hallway. She was the cafeteria lady who worked the night shift, a woman in her 50s with grey hair always tied in a bun, and a kind gaze that had witnessed a lot in that company. She saw Marianne in a panic and immediately approached. "What is it, dear? What happened?" Marianne could barely speak between sobs. She tried to explain, the words tumbling out, confused. Mrs. Celia understood enough. Without judging, without asking unnecessary questions, she acted. She knew where the spare set of keys was kept. In a few minutes, she returned and unlocked the locker room door. Marianne ran in and swept Sophia into her arms. The little girl was red from crying so much, her body tense, her eyes wide with fear. Marianne hugged her to her chest, crying with her, whispering apologies that Sophia couldn't understand but perhaps felt in the tone of her voice, in the desperate embrace. Mrs. Celia watched from the doorway, a hand on her chest, her own eyes glistening. After a few minutes, When Marianne had managed to calm her daughter and herself a little, the woman spoke softly. "Come with me to the break room, dear. Let me stay with the little one while you finish your work. You can't be like this. She needs you whole, not in pieces." Marianne hesitated. She didn't want to be separated from Sophia for even a second. But Mrs. Celia was right. She had to finish the job. She couldn't lose this job. And maybe, just maybe, in the break room with Mrs. Celia, Sophia would be safer than alone in that locker room. The break room was a small but cozy space, with a round table, comfortable chairs, a refrigerator and a microwave. Mrs. Celia made a hot tea for Marianne and offered cookies to Sophia. The girl, still frightened, didn't want to eat, but she agreed to sit on the older woman's lap while Marianne drank the tea in quick sips. "I'll be right back, I promise," Marianne said, kissing her daughter's forehead. Mrs. Celia nodded, already rocking Sophia with the natural cadence of someone who has raised children. Marianne went back to the corridor, grabbed her cleaning cart and tried to focus. But with every minute that passed, her anxiety grew. She checked the clock constantly. 15 minutes, 20, half an hour. She had to get back to Sophia. That's when she heard a scream coming from the direction of the break room. Her blood ran cold. She dropped everything and ran. When she reached the break room, she found the door open and Mrs. Celia asleep in her chair, her head lolled to the side, snoring softly. The exhaustion of a shift that had started at 6 in the morning had finally overcome her. But Sophia wasn't there. Marianne felt the floor disappear from under her feet. She looked around behind the table, inside the small cupboard. Nothing. Sophia was gone. A 1.5-year-old child, alone in a commercial building on the 22nd floor. She began searching the corridors, calling softly, trying not to make too much noise but also desperate to find her daughter. She checked the restroom, the file, her room, the locker room again. Nothing. Where could a small child go? And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, the door to the large conference room was ajar, and through the crack, a bright light and muffled voices streamed out. Marianne approached slowly, her heart leaping. She peeked through the crack and her blood froze. Inside, around a huge, long table, sat several men in suits, company executives, and under the table, crawling slowly across the carpeted floor, was Sophia. The little girl moved in silence, as she always did, perhaps drawn by the light or the different sounds. Marianne wanted to scream, to run in and grab her daughter, but she was paralyzed for a second. What would she do? How would she explain? She would lose her job. She would be humiliated, maybe even worse. But then one of the men stood up abruptly, angry about something another had said. His foot nearly stepped on Sophia. The little girl let out a frightened yelp and scrambled out from under the table, staggering to her feet, holding onto one of the chairs for support. The meeting stopped. All the men turned to look. A heavy silence filled the room. Sophia, trembling, her eyes wide and scared, backed away until she was against the wall. She began to cry softly, that restrained whimper she made when she was very scared, but couldn't express it. That's when Marianne entered. She didn't think, she just acted. She pushed the door open and ran to her daughter, scooping her into her arms and turning her back to the men, shielding Sophia with her own body. Her tears fell as she rocked the girl, whispering apologies, trying to calm her. The men remained silent. Marianne finally turned, still holding her, daughter against her chest, and faced those men. Some looked annoyed, others confused. One of them had an expression she couldn't decipher. "I'm so sorry," she began to say. Her voice choked. "I had no choice. My neighbor is in the hospital. I had no one to leave her with. I need this job. Please don't fire me. I'm so sorry. I'm really so sorry." The words tumbled out between sobs. Marianne knew she was destroying any chance she had, but she couldn't stop talking. She explained about Sophia, about her daughter's special condition, about the desperation that had brought her here. She explained about the locker room, about the door that was locked, about Mrs. Celia who tried to help. One of the men stood up. He was tall, with greying hair, an impeccable suit, and an expression of anger on his face. Marianne recognized him immediately and felt her stomach churn. It was Fabian Alden, one of the company's executive directors. But to her, he was much more than that. He had been a mistake from her past, a brief involvement that had resulted in Sophia. A man who had disappeared when he learned of the pregnancy, denying all responsibility. And now he was there in front of her with that furious look. The night that had started badly was about to get much, much worse. The air inside the conference room seemed to have grown heavier, so dense it felt as if someone had sucked out all the oxygen at once. Marianne held Sophia so tightly her arms ached, but she couldn't loosen her grip. The little girl had stopped crying, but her small body still trembled, and she buried her face in her mother's neck, hiding from the loud voices and the bright light that hurt. Her sensitive eyes. Fabian Alden took a step forward. His face was red, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Marianne could see in his eyes a mixture of anger and something else, something that looked like fear. Fear of being exposed, fear that this scene would reveal truths he had buried long ago. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was too loud, sharp. "This is a private meeting. You are not authorized to be on this floor right now. How did this child get in here?" Marianne tried to speak, but her throat was tight. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The tears continued to stream down her face, soaking the blouse already damp with sweat from her work. It was another man who spoke. He was sitting at the head of the table, a position that indicated authority. He was older than the others, perhaps in his 50s, with well-cut grey hair and elegant glasses. His voice was calm, controlled, a stark contrast to Fabian's aggressive tone. "Calm down, Fabian. Can't you see she's terrified?" He stood up and walked slowly toward Marianne, keeping a respectful distance. "What's your name?" "Marianne," she managed to whisper. "Marianne Costa. I work for the cleaning service. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I just had no one to leave my daughter with today, and—" "You don't need to justify yourself right now," he interrupted gently. His name was Robert Alden, though Marianne didn't know it yet. The company's president, Fabian's brother, two men who shared the same last name but had followed very different paths in life. Robert looked at Sophia, still hidden in her mother's arms, and something in his chest tightened. There was something about the scene that moved him in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the obvious vulnerability of this woman, clearly doing the best she could under impossible circumstances, or perhaps it was the little girl, so small and fragile. "How old is she?" Robert asked, his voice still soft. "1.5 years," Marianne replied, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "She's on the autism spectrum. She doesn't like noise, bright lights, strange places. I would never have done this if I had any other choice. You have to believe me." That's when Fabian exploded. "Autism? That's ridiculous." He pointed a finger at Marianne, his voice rising even higher. "This woman is lying. She's trying to create a scene. She's trying to extort me." The other executives in the room began to exchange uncomfortable glances. Some had heard rumors about Fabian's explosive temper, but they had never witnessed it up close. Others wondered why he was so agitated over a simple cleaning lady. Robert frowned. "Extort you? What are you talking about, Fabian?" Fabian ran a hand over his face, realizing he had said too much. He tried to backtrack, to moderate his tone, but the damage was done. "Nothing, forget it, I just think she's using the child to get something. You know how these people are." "These people?" Robert repeated the words slowly, each syllable laden with disapproval. "Be careful what you say next." Marianne remained standing, frozen in the middle of the room, feeling as though she was at the center of something much larger than she had imagined. Sophia started to squirm in her arms, looking for her bottle. Marianne had nothing to offer. She had left everything in the break room. "I'll take her and go," she said quietly. "I'll finish my work and then I'll leave. I'm sorry. For everything. Please don't fire me. I need this job." She turned to leave, but Robert stepped forward. "Wait. Don't go yet." There was something in his voice that made Marianne stop. She turned back slowly, confused. Robert took another step closer, his eyes fixed on Sophia. The little girl had lifted her head from her mother's shoulder and was now looking at him with her large, dark eyes. And then something unexpected happened. Sophia stretched her little arms out toward Robert. It was a gesture she rarely made. Marianne knew this better than anyone. Sophia disliked physical contact with strangers. She avoided hugs, rejected being held by people she didn't know, but now, for no reason, she wanted to go into this man's arms. Marianne was so surprised she didn't know how to react. Robert, equally surprised, looked at her, silently asking for permission. Marianne nodded, still not understanding what was happening. Carefully, Robert took Sophia into his arms. The girl settled against his chest, as if she had known him for years. She closed her tired eyes and sighed, finally relaxing after all the night's tension. Robert felt a pang in his chest so strong that for a moment he thought he might cry. It had been years since he had held a child like this. His daughter Laura had been almost the same age as Sophia when she was diagnosed with a rare disease. He had spent months holding her just like this, rocking her when the pain became unbearable, singing softly when she couldn't sleep. Laura had passed away 5 years ago, taking a part of Robert with her that he had never been able to recover. Since then, he had avoided any contact with young children. It was too painful. But now, holding Sophia, something different was happening. It wasn't just pain. It was also a strange kind of comfort, as if this tiny child were filling a void he thought would remain open forever. That's when he saw it. Adjusting Sophia in his arms, he turned her slightly to the side. The bright light of the room illuminated the nape of the girl's neck, where her fine hair parted, and there, right at the base of her neck, was a birthmark. It wasn't large, but it had a very specific shape, a sort of irregular crescent moon. Robert felt the blood drain from his face. His hands began to tremble. That mark. He knew that mark. It was an extremely rare hereditary trait in the Alden family, documented for generations. His grandmother had it. His father had it. He himself had it, and Laura, his daughter, had had it too. Only people with Alden DNA had that mark in that exact place and specific shape, which meant one impossible, absurd, but undeniably true thing. The child in his arms had Alden blood. This child was family. She was his niece. Robert slowly raised his eyes and looked at Fabian. His brother had also gone, pale but for different reasons. Fabian knew what was about to happen. He knew that mark too, and from Robert's expression, he knew he had been discovered. The room was completely silent. The other executives watched, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that something monumental was taking place. "Is she yours?" Robert asked, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Is this child your daughter?" Fabian opened and closed his mouth. He tried to speak, but couldn't. His silence was answer enough. Robert turned to Marianne. She was pale, her eyes wide, clearly not understanding what was happening but feeling the tension in the air. "This child," he pointed to the mark on Sophia's neck, "has the Alden family birthmark. It's an extremely rare genetic trait. Only direct descendants have this mark." He paused, trying to control the rage building inside him. "Is my brother her father?" Marianne swallowed hard. For a moment she thought about denying it, about making up some story. But she was tired of lies, tired of carrying this weight alone. She nodded, the tears beginning to fall again. "Yes, he's the father. But when I found out I was pregnant," he said, "I was lying, that I was trying to pull a scam, that he never wanted to see me again. He offered me money to—" She couldn't finish the sentence in front of the other men. "He offered me money to get rid of the problem. I refused. I had Sophia alone. I've raised her alone. I've never asked him for anything. Until today." The room erupted in murmurs. The other executives began talking at once, some looking at Fabian with disapproval, others clearly shocked. Fabian remained silent, but his face expressed pure rage. Finally he spoke. His voice came out shaky, defensive. "She was after my money. It was a one-night stand. She knew who I was, knew I had money. It was obviously a setup." Marianne felt the humiliation burn in her chest. "It wasn't a setup. I didn't even know who you were when we met. You lied about your name. You lied about everything. And when I found out the truth, you threatened me, said you would destroy my life if I told anyone." "Lies!" Fabian shouted. Robert raised a hand, calling for silence. He still held Sophia, who had fallen asleep in his arms, oblivious to the chaos around her. His voice, when he spoke, was icy. Tomorrow morning, I want a DNA test scheduled at the best lab in New York. I want the truth officially confirmed. He looked at Fabian with a hardness the others rarely saw. And you, brother, will take that test. It's not a request. Fabian wanted to protest, but Robert cut him off. And don't even think about disappearing or making things difficult. I have the best lawyers in the city. If this child is yours, and we know she is because of the mark, you will take responsibility. All of it. One of the executives, an older man from the legal department, spoke up. Robert, perhaps it would be best to continue this conversation in private. This meeting is already... No, Robert interrupted. This meeting is over. Everyone can leave. Except you, Fabian, and you, Marianne. The three of us need to talk. The other men began to file out, some still glancing back with curiosity, others clearly relieved to escape the uncomfortable situation. In a few minutes, the room was empty except for the three adults and the sleeping child. Robert walked to one of the chairs and sat down carefully, still holding Sophia. Marianne remained standing, unsure what to do. Fabian leaned against the wall on the other side of the room, arms crossed, his face a mask. Tell me everything, Robert said to Marianne. From the beginning, I want to know exactly what happened. And Marianne told him. She told him about the night she met a man in a bar near her apartment, a man who said his name was Philip and that he worked in sales. He had been kind, funny, attentive. They had a few beers, talked for hours. One thing led to another. She didn't usually do that. She wasn't the type of woman who went home with strangers, but she had felt so lonely at the time, still recovering from the loss of her mother a few months earlier. It was only the next day, after he had left, leaving only a phone number that never answered, that she discovered from a receipt he'd forgotten that his real name was Fabian Alden. A quick Google search revealed he was an executive director at a major construction firm. Marianne didn't call. She figured it was just a one-night thing, that it was better to forget and move on. But then she found out she was pregnant. She tried calling him for weeks. When she finally got through, he was cold, harsh, accusing her of lying. He offered her money to solve the problem. When Marianne refused and said she was going to have the baby, he threatened her. He said he had powerful lawyers, that he would destroy her reputation, that no one would believe her. Marianne had Sophia alone in a public hospital, with only a friend by her side. She raised the girl by doing odd jobs, taking any work she could find. When she got the cleaning job at the construction company months later, she didn't know it was Fabian's company. She only found out when she saw him in the hallway for the first time, months after being hired. He recognized her too, but simply ignored her as if she were invisible. I never asked him for anything, Marianne finished, her voice choked. I never threatened to expose him. I just wanted to raise my daughter in peace. But it's hard. It's so hard alone. Sophia needs special care, therapies I can't afford. And I swear I try to give her the best, but some days she couldn't go on. She broke down right there, covering her face with her hands, crying out all the fears, all the sleepless nights, all the accumulated exhaustion. Robert felt his chest tighten. He looked at the little girl in his arms, so small, so innocent, and then at his brother. Fabian avoided his gaze, but Robert could see the guilt written in every line of his expression. You are a disgrace, Robert said, each word heavy as lead. A disgrace to this family, to our company, to the memory of our parents, Fabian finally snapped. You don't understand anything. I had just gotten separated. I was vulnerable. She took advantage. She took advantage. Robert stood up, still holding Sophia carefully. Look at her. He pointed to Marianne. She is broken, working herself to exhaustion, raising a special needs child alone, and you think she's the one taking advantage. I didn't know the child was special, Fabian muttered, something in his voice finally breaking. Does that change anything? She is your daughter, your responsibility. And you abandoned her. You abandoned them both. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Robert returned to his chair, trying to organize his thoughts. He had to act, had to do something to right this terrible injustice. But what? How could he fix years of neglect? Then an idea began to form in his mind. It was bold, perhaps even reckless. But looking at the child in his arms, feeling her weight against his chest, remembering the daughter he had lost, Robert knew what he had to do. "Marianne," he called softly. She lifted her face, her eyes red and swollen. "Do you trust me?" She blinked, confused. "I don't even know you, sir." No, but I need you to, because I'm going to do something that will change both of your lives, and I need you to let me help." Marianne looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and a sliver of desperate hope. "What do you want to do?" "First, we'll do that DNA test, even though we already know the result. We need official proof. Then I'm going to initiate legal proceedings against my brother. Paternity establishment, retroactive child support, everything you're entitled to." He glared at Fabian. "And you will cooperate, or you'll be fired and face an even worse lawsuit." Fabian wanted to protest, but Robert continued. "More than that, I will ensure Marianne has stability, a better position in the company, a fair salary, benefits for her and Sophia, and I will arrange for the best specialists to evaluate and treat the girl's condition. All of this not as a favor, but as a moral and family obligation." Marianne was stunned. "This can't be real. Why would you do this?" Robert looked down at Sophia, still sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Because she's family, because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He paused, his voice growing softer. "I know what it's like to lose a daughter. I won't let this one grow up without the love and care she deserves." The words hit Marianne like a wave. For the first time in a long time, she felt she wasn't alone, that someone was willing to fight by her side. But she also felt fear that it was too good to be true, fear of allowing herself hope only to be disappointed again. As if reading her thoughts, Robert spoke. "I know it's hard to trust, especially after everything you've been through, but I will prove you can trust me, step by step, day by day." He stood up, walked over to Marianne, and carefully returned Sophia to her arms. The little girl murmured something in her sleep, but didn't wake. "Go home now. Get some rest. Tomorrow my driver will pick you up and take you to the lab for the test. And after that we'll talk about the future for both of you." Marianne nodded, still processing everything. She left the conference room as if she were floating, as if none of it were real. In the hallway she found Mrs. Celia, who had woken up and was anxiously looking for her. "My goodness, child, where were you? Where's the little one?" "It's okay, Mrs. Celia," Marianne said, and for the first time in a long time she truly believed those words. "I think it's going to be okay." But as she descended in the elevator holding Sophia, one last image was seared into her mind, the look in Fabian's eyes as she left the room. It wasn't just anger, it was something darker. It was hatred. And Marianne knew with a shiver down her spine that this battle was just beginning. Marianne's apartment was in an old building in the Bronx. It was 2 tiny rooms with water stains on the walls and a window that didn't close properly. But it was what she could afford, and it had become her refuge, the only place where she could let her guard down and just be herself. That night, after everything that had happened, Marianne arrived home at almost 2 in the morning. She put Sophia in the makeshift bed she had made in the corner of the room, covered her with the thin blanket and sat on the floor beside her. She stayed there for hours, just watching her daughter sleep, trying to process everything. Could it be possible that all of this had really happened, or was it a cruel dream from which she would wake to find that nothing had changed? Marianne wanted to believe Robert's promises, but years of disappointment had taught her not to trust pretty words. Promises were easy to make. Keeping them was the hard part. Sleep came only as the sun began to rise, and it was interrupted a few hours later by the ringing of her phone. Marianne answered with a voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Good morning, Marianne. This is Frederick, Mr. Robert Alden's driver. I'm waiting in front of your building to take you to the laboratory." Marianne shot up, her heart pounding. It wasn't a dream. It was real. She looked at the clock. 8:30 in the morning. She had only slept for 3 hours. "I need a few minutes to get ready," she managed to say. "No problem. I'll wait here." Marianne had never gotten ready so fast in her life. She bathed Sophia, dressed the girl in the least worn-out outfit she had, splashed water on her own face and tied her hair in a hasty bun. There was no time for makeup, not that she had much anyway. She hurried down the stairs, holding Sophia in her arms and her bag on her shoulder, trying not to trip in her haste. In front of the building, a gleaming black car was waiting. A man in a suit got out and opened the back door for her. Marianne had never been in a car like this. The seats were soft leather, there was air conditioning, and even a small bottle of mineral water in the cup holder. Sophia, fascinated, touched everything with curiosity. Marianne tried to stop her, afraid she would get something dirty or break it, but the driver smiled in the rearview mirror. "Let her play. Mr. Alden said it would be a special day for you too." The laboratory was on the Upper East Side, a wealthy neighborhood Marianne only knew from passing through on the bus. It was one of those places with an all-glass facade, an elegant reception with comfortable sofas and expensive magazines on the coffee tables. When they entered, a receptionist was already waiting for them. "Mrs. Marianne, please come. With me. Everything is prepared." The test was quick and painless. A cotton swab on the inside of Sophia's cheek, then another on Marianne's. The technician explained that the results would be ready in 3 days, but that a rush had been requested. When they came out, Robert was waiting in the reception area. He was wearing a light grey suit and looked like he had slept much better than Marianne. When he saw them, his face lit up with a genuine smile. "How are you?" he asked, crouching down to be at Sophia's level. The little girl looked at him for a moment, then held out her arms just as she had the night before. Robert picked her up, and Marianne felt a pang in her chest, seeing how easily that bond was forming. "I'm confused," Marianne admitted. "This all still feels unreal." "I understand." Robert adjusted Sophia in his arms. "That's why I brought something that might help make things more concrete." He gestured to a man waiting near the exit. "This is Mr. Henry Travers, my personal attorney. He will handle the entire legal process." The lawyer was a middle-aged man, serious in appearance but not intimidating. He shook Marianne's hand gently. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marianne. Robert told me about your situation. I want you to know that we will do everything in our power to ensure your rights and those of little Sophia." "But I don't have money to pay for a lawyer," Marianne said, her voice small. "You don't need to pay for anything," Robert replied. "This is on me. Consider it part of the family's responsibility. Sophia is my niece. It's my duty to protect her and you." They went to a nearby cafe, a quiet place where they could talk, without being rushed. Robert ordered sandwiches, juices, and even a special glass of milk for Sophia. As they ate, the lawyer explained the next steps. "First, we will officially establish paternity through the DNA test. With that, we will file for recognition of paternity and a request for retroactive child support since Sophia's birth. Based on Mr. Fabian's income, the support should be substantial." Marianne swallowed hard. "He'll fight it. I know him. He'll do everything he can to avoid taking responsibility." "He can try," the lawyer said calmly, "but the law is on our side, and we have the birthmark as additional evidence. Furthermore, we will also seek protective orders if there is any attempt at intimidation on his part." "There was," Marianne said quietly. "He threatened me when I found out I was pregnant. He said he would destroy my life if I told anyone." Robert and the lawyer exchanged glances. "That is very important," the lawyer said. "Do you have any proof of these threats? Messages, recordings, witnesses?" Marianne thought. "I told a friend at the time. She overheard some of the calls. And I wrote everything down in a notebook, the dates, what he said. I thought I might need it one day." "Perfect. We will need that notebook and your friend's testimony. The more documentation we have, the better." They talked for over an hour, organizing strategies, discussing possibilities. Marianne's head was spinning with so much information, so many decisions to make. But for the first time, she wasn't alone in this process. There were people by her side, fighting for her. When they finished, Robert made a proposal that left Marianne speechless. "I want you and Sophia to come live with me temporarily." Marianne blinked, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "My house is large, far too empty for one person. I have plenty of rooms, and I think it would be safer for you both." He paused. "I know my brother. When the lawsuit officially begins, he might try something. Intimidate you, spread lies. At my house, you would be protected." Marianne shook her head. I can't accept that. It's too much. You're already doing so much for us." "It's not out of kindness," Robert said softly. "It's because it's the right thing to do. And because, selfishly, I think it would do me good too. That house has been empty for years. Maybe it's time it had life in it again." There was something in his voice, an old sadness that Marianne recognized, because she saw the same thing when she looked in the mirror. The pain of loss, loneliness, the emptiness of someone who has lost someone important. But what if things go wrong? What if I get used to it and then you change your mind? I can't do that to Sophia. She's already been abandoned once. Robert looked at the little girl, who was playing with a paper napkin, completely oblivious to the conversation. "I won't abandon you. I'll put it in writing." He looked at the lawyer. "Henry, prepare a document ensuring that Marianne maintains full autonomy over Sophia, that she can leave my house whenever she wants, and that any support offered is voluntary and without strings attached. I want everything official so she feels secure." The lawyer nodded. "I'll do it today." Marianne felt the tears return. For years she had fought alone, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And now, suddenly, there was help. There was support. There was hope. It was almost too much to process. "Okay," she said finally. "But it's on one condition. I keep working. I won't live on handouts. I need my independence." "You can work, but not as a cleaner," Robert said. "I'll transfer you to the administrative department, same starting salary, but with opportunities for growth, and hours compatible with Sophia's care. How does that sound?" Marianne couldn't answer. She just cried, years of tension finally being released in tears of relief and gratitude. The move happened quickly. Robert sent people to pick up Marianne's few belongings from the apartment in the Bronx. It wasn't much. Clothes, some of Sophia's toys, the notebook with the records. Of the threats, photographs of Marianne's mother, who had passed away years before. Robert's house was in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a gated community full of security. It was enormous, 3 stories, a pool, a garden. Marianne had never set foot in a place like this. She felt small and out of place as they walked in. Sophia, on the other hand, was fascinated. She ran from one side to the other, touching the curtains, looking at the paintings on the wall, laughing at her reflection in the large mirrors. Robert smiled, watching her, that old expression of sadness giving way to something lighter. "This will be your room," he said, opening a door on the 2nd floor. It was a spacious room with a king-size bed, a huge wardrobe, and windows overlooking the garden. Next to it was another smaller room, which was already being prepared especially for Sophia. Soft colors on the walls, educational toys appropriate for children with special needs, even a rocking chair that Robert had ordered after researching autism the night before. "You did all this in one day?" Marianne asked, incredulous. "When I decide to do something, I don't like to wait," he answered with a shy smile. The first few days were strange. Marianne would wake up at 5 in the morning out of habit, but she had nowhere to go so early. The house was quiet, just the sound of Sophia murmuring in the next room. Robert was usually already awake too, working in his office on the ground floor. He would make coffee for everyone, make pancakes for Sophia, and they would talk about the day while having breakfast in the enormous kitchen. It was all very civilized, very polite. But there was also an unspoken tension and awareness that this was temporary, transitional, and that no one really knew how things would unfold. Mrs. Celia visited during the first week, bringing a homemade cake and a teddy bear for Sophia. They sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, and the older woman looked around with approval. "You deserve this, child. After everything you've been through, you deserve every second of peace." "I'm afraid of getting used to it," Marianne confessed. "I'm afraid it's temporary, and then I'll go back to that life and won't be able to handle it anymore." Mrs. Celia took her hand across the table. "Then enjoy every day as if it were a gift. And trust. That man, Mr. Robert, I saw it in his eyes. He's not the type to give up on people." The weeks passed. The DNA results came back, officially confirming what everyone already knew. Fabian was Sophia's father. The legal process began, and as predicted, Fabian fought tooth and nail. He hired his own lawyers, tried to claim the test was wrong, that it had been tampered with. He spread rumors throughout the company that Marianne was an opportunist. that she was using a child to scam his family. He even tried to suggest that the birthmark was a forged tattoo. Nothing worked. The evidence was irrefutable. The mark was genetic, documented in generations of the Alden family. The DNA didn't lie, and Marianne's notebook, with detailed notes of the threats, plus her friend's testimony, sealed the case. The judge ordered retroactive child support since Sophia's birth, plus a monthly payment that was almost 3 times the salary Marianne had been earning. He also established that Fabian must keep his distance, forbidden from approaching Marianne or Sophia without judicial supervision. Fabian appealed. He hired journalists to plant false stories on gossip blogs, trying to create a narrative that he was the victim of a setup. He even tried to forge evidence that Marianne had other relationships, in a pathetic attempt to question paternity despite the DNA. All of this reached Marianne through Robert and the lawyer, who filtered as much as possible to spare her. But it was impossible to protect her completely. She saw the articles online, read the cruel comments, felt the humiliation renewed with each new lie that was spread. On one particularly difficult night, after reading an article that painted her as a prostitute who had gotten pregnant on purpose to extort a successful businessman, Marianne locked herself in the bathroom and cried until she had no tears left. Robert knocked on the door softly. "Marianne, may I come in?" She opened the door, her face swollen and red. He said nothing, just hugged her. It was a hug of comfort, of understanding, with no ulterior motives, and Marianne allowed herself to be held, something she hadn't done in a very long time. "It will pass," he whispered. "This storm will pass, and when it does you'll still be standing, I promise." And for the first time Marianne believed him. But that same night, something else happened. Sophia woke up crying, one of those cries that indicated a nightmare or discomfort. Marianne went to calm her, but the girl was inconsolable. It was Robert who appeared at the bedroom door, half asleep, and offered to help. "Can I try?" he asked. Marianne, exhausted, nodded. Robert picked Sophia up and began to walk around the room, rocking her gently. He sang a lullaby, softly, an old melody his own mother used to sing. Sophia calmed down almost immediately, snuggling into his shoulder. "You're good at this," Marianne commented, watching from the bed. "I had practice," he replied, his voice heavy with that old sadness. "My daughter had trouble sleeping in her last few months. I would spend entire nights with her in my arms, singing, telling stories." He paused. "Sometimes I think it's the only thing I know how to do right, to be there for someone who needs me." "You lost your daughter," Marianne said softly. It wasn't a question. Robert nodded, still rocking Sophia. 5 years ago, a rare disease. The doctors did what they could, but it wasn't enough. He looked at the little girl in his arms. "She would be Sophia's age if she were here. Sometimes I look at your daughter and I see mine, and it hurts, but it also heals somehow." Marianne felt her chest tighten. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I don't like to talk about it." He gave a sad smile. "But I think you have a right to know, to understand why I'm doing all this. It's not just family obligation. It's also a second chance. For me, to be the uncle Sophia deserves. To honor my Laura's memory by doing what she would have wanted me to do. Protect a child in need." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marianne understood in that moment that Robert wasn't just helping out of duty. He was healing his own wounds while protecting hers. Sophia had fallen completely asleep. Robert carefully placed her back in her crib, covered her, and stood there for a few more seconds just watching. When he turned to leave, Marianne called out to him. "Robert?" He stopped at the door. "Thank you for everything, for giving us this chance." He smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I should be thanking you, Marianne. You two brought life back into this house, into me." And in that moment something shifted between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something deeper than friendship. It was respect. It was trust. It was the first crack of light entering two hearts that had been closed for a very long time. Outside, the legal battle continued. Fabian would not give up so easily. But inside, in that large and once empty house, A new family was beginning to form. Slowly, carefully, but with roots that grew deeper every day. And Sophia, oblivious to the dramas of the adults, slept peacefully, finally safe in the arms of those who loved her. 3 months had passed since that fateful night in the conference room. Spring had arrived in New York, and the cherry blossom trees lining the streets of Greenwich were in full bloom, painting the landscape in shades of pink and white. Marianne watched these flowers from her bedroom window every morning, still not used to the view, still half expecting to wake up and find it was all an elaborate dream. But it wasn't a dream, it was real, frighteningly, wonderfully real. Sophia had changed, so much in those months that sometimes Marianne barely recognized her own daughter. Not physically, the girl was still small and delicate, with those dark eyes and straight hair, but there was a light in her now that hadn't been there before. She smiled more. She explored the world with less fear. The sessions with the occupational therapist Robert had hired were making a difference. Sophia still had her peculiarities, her sensitivities, but she was learning to navigate the world more comfortably. And the bond between her and Robert was something that surprised everyone. The girl who barely tolerated physical contact now sought out her uncle constantly. When he came home from work, she would run to the door with her arms outstretched. She slept better when he rocked her. She laughed at the silly faces he made. It was as if she recognized something essential in him, some connection that went beyond genetics and into the territory of the heart. Marianne watched this with complex feelings. Gratitude, obviously, relief at seeing her daughter so loved, but also a tiny pang of jealousy that she tried to suppress. Sophia was hers alone. She had cared for the girl by herself for 1.5 years through the most difficult times. And now Robert showed up and won her daughter's heart with such ease. But these were petty thoughts she wasn't proud of. Robert deserved that love. He was doing more for Sophia than her own father ever had. And besides, Marianne knew her jealousy wasn't really about Sophia. It was about herself. About the fact that she, too, was slowly, dangerously, falling in love with Robert Alden. It wasn't something she had planned. In fact, she had actively fought against it. After Fabian, she had sworn never again to trust wealthy men, pretty promises, or charming smiles. She had built towering walls around her heart, walls she thought were impenetrable. But Robert was different. He didn't make grand promises. He took action. He didn't try to impress her with money or power. He was simply present, in the little things, in the breakfast he made every day, in the way he asked about her day and actually listened to the answers, in the patience with which he handled Sophia's meltdowns, in the quiet kindness that permeated his every gesture. And there were the moments, those small moments she treasured in her heart like secret jewels, when their hands accidentally brushed as they reached for the same object, when their gazes met across the room and held for a second longer than was appropriate, when he laughed at something she said and his whole face lit up, young again, free from the sadness he usually carried. But Marianne couldn't allow herself these feelings. She was his employee, living in his house out of necessity, financially dependent on him while the legal process unfolded. Any kind of relationship would be inappropriate, unbalanced. And what if things went wrong? She would lose everything. The house, the support, the security. And worse, Sophia would lose the father figure she'd never had. No. It was better to keep her distance, to be grateful, to be polite, but to keep her feelings locked away where they couldn't cause trouble. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It was on a Friday night that everything changed. Robert had come home from work early, a rare occurrence. He found Marianne in the kitchen trying to make dinner while Sophia played on the floor with building blocks. He had brought pizza, saying they all deserved a night off from cooking. They ate in the informal living room, something they rarely did. Sophia was particularly animated, mimicking sounds from the television, laughing at her own voice. It was one of those golden, perfect moments where everything seemed to be exactly where it should be. After Sophia fell asleep, Marianne went back to the living room to clear the plates. Robert was on the porch, looking out at the illuminated garden. She hesitated, thinking of leaving him alone with his thoughts. But there was something in his posture, something vulnerable that drew her closer. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Robert turned. There was a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the small table beside him. He offered one to her. Marianne accepted, surprised. They rarely drank together. "Today is the 5th anniversary of Laura's death," he said without preamble. "It's always a difficult day, but this year was less heavy. I think it's because of you two." Marianne sat beside him, not sure what to say. She sensed Robert needed to talk, so she simply waited. And he talked. He told her about Laura, about how she had been a smiling, vibrant child until she was 3 when the symptoms began. How it took doctors months to get a diagnosis, how he and his wife had dedicated themselves completely to her care, abandoning careers, friends, a social life. How in the end it wasn't enough. How afterward their marriage couldn't withstand the grief, each blaming the other, each drowning in their own pain until there was nothing left to share. "She left me a year after Laura passed," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "She said she couldn't look at me anymore without seeing our daughter, and I understood, because I felt the same. The house became empty. My heart became empty. I lived on autopilot for years, work, home, work, without truly feeling anything." He looked at Marianne, and there were tears in his eyes. "Until you two showed up. You reminded me that I'm still alive, that I can still feel, not just pain, but joy too, hope." Marianne felt her own heart race. There was something in the intensity of his gaze, in the vulnerability of that moment, that left her defenseless. "You saved us," she said quietly. "Me and Sophia. I don't know where we would be if it weren't for you." "I think we saved each other," he replied. He set his wineglass aside and took her hand. "Marianne, I need to tell you something. I've been trying not to, because I don't want to pressure you. I don't want you to feel obligated, but I can't hold it in anymore." Marianne's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. She knew what was coming. She felt it in her fingertips, in the air between them. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Maybe I'm already in love. I don't know. It's been so long since I've felt this, I don't recognize it anymore. But I know that when you walk into a room, everything gets brighter. When you smile, my whole day gets better. When you're near, I feel whole in a way I haven't in years." Marianne couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. Robert squeezed her hand. "You don't have to answer now. You don't have to feel the same. I just needed you to know. And if this makes you uncomfortable, if you'd rather we go back to just being how we were before, I'll respect that. I won't do anything to make you want to leave, because having you and Sophia here, even just as family, is better than having nothing at all." It was then that Marianne found her voice, hoarse, trembling but firm. "Me too," she said. "I'm falling in love with you too. I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance, but I can't. You're the first person in years who makes me feel like I'm not alone, like I don't have to carry everything on my own. And that scares me, Robert. It scares me lot." "Why does it scare you?" he asked gently. "Because I've trusted before. I've believed in promises. And I was destroyed." She looked down at their intertwined hands. "I'm afraid that when you really get to know me, when you see all my flaws, all my faults, you'll change your mind. You'll realize I'm not enough." Robert used his free hand to lift her chin, making her meet his eyes. "Marianne, I see you, every day. I see the incredible mother you are. I see how you fight, how strong you are even when you're broken inside. I see your kindness, your courage, and every single thing I see only makes me admire you more." "But I come with Sophia," Marianne whispered, "with all her special needs, with all the work she requires, and with all the drama of the lawsuit against your brother. It's a lot of baggage, Robert, a lot of complications." "Sophia is a gift, not baggage," he said firmly. "And as for my brother, he is my problem, not yours. He was my problem long before you showed up. I always knew he was selfish, irresponsible, but I didn't know to what extent until that night. Making him take responsibility for Sophia isn't a favor. It's justice." He moved closer, and Marianne could feel his warmth, the scent of his cologne mixed with something essentially masculine. "Marianne Costa, let me do this right. Let me court you properly. No rush, no pressure. Just two adults getting to know each other, seeing if what we feel can become something more solid. What do you say?" Marianne could hardly believe this was happening, that this incredible, kind man was asking for permission to love her, not demanding, not assuming, asking. "I accept," she said, and she had barely finished the sentence when Robert kissed her. It was a soft, careful kiss, full of unspoken promises. There was no urgency, no need to go further in that moment. It was just a kiss. But it was also a beginning, a commitment, a step toward something new and scary and wonderful. When they parted, they were both crying and smiling at the same time. Robert rested his forehead against hers. "Let's take it slow, okay? At your pace. At our pace." "Slow," she agreed. And then she added with a shy smile, "But not too slow." They laughed, and it was a light, free sound full of possibility. But it wasn't all flowers and kisses on the porch. While Robert and Marianne cautiously navigated the beginning of their relationship, Fabian was plotting his revenge. He had lost in court. Paternity was established, child support determined. But Fabian Alden was not a man who accepted defeat, and if he couldn't win legally, he would find other means. He started subtly. He planted stories in gossip blogs about how his brother was in an inappropriate relationship with an employee. He suggested that Robert was using his position of power to manipulate a vulnerable woman. He insinuated that there was something suspicious about how quickly Marianne had moved into her boss's house. The stories gained traction. They began to appear in more respectable outlets. Journalists called the company asking for comments. Employees whispered in the hallways. Marianne felt the stares when she went to work, the sudden silences when she entered a room. Robert tried to protect her, but it was hard to fight rumors. He issued an official statement explaining that Marianne was his niece by affinity and was living in his home for security reasons related to the paternity case. But the truth is never as interesting as a scandal. Things worsened when Fabian managed to leak photos. They were nothing compromising, just Robert and Marianne out together with Sophia, having dinner at a restaurant, walking in the park. But the way the photos were presented, with suggestive captions and malicious insinuations, turned innocent moments into something sordid. The pressure became so great that Robert called a meeting with the company's shareholders. Marianne wanted to go with him, but he insisted she stay. He didn't want to expose her any further. The meeting was tense. Fabian was there, with his lawyers, and a few shareholders he had convinced that Robert's behavior was inappropriate and tarnishing the company's image. He accused Robert of nepotism, of mixing his personal life with business, of giving a job and benefits to a woman just because he was romantically involved with her. Robert calmly rebutted each accusation with evidence. He showed that Marianne had been hired before he even knew of her existence, that her salary increase was for a real position she held and performed with excellence, that any personal relationship between them had only recently begun and did not affect his professional decisions. Then, he launched his counterattack. He documented all the times Fabian had used company resources for personal gain, all the unauthorized trips, all the questionable expenses, all the petty thefts and infractions that had accumulated over the years. But the final blow came when Robert presented recordings, conversations Fabian had had with colleagues where he openly admitted to abandoning his daughter, that he considered Marianne just a meaningless fling, and that he planned to destroy her and Robert's reputations out of revenge. The recordings had been obtained legally, through private investigators Robert had discreetly hired, and they were devastating. The shareholders were silent as they listened. There was the true face of Fabian Alden, not a wronged man, but a father who had abandoned a special needs child, an employee who stole from his own company, a brother who was trying to destroy his family out of wounded pride. When Robert finished his presentation, he made a proposal. Either Fabian resigned immediately and left the company with a non-disclosure agreement, or Robert would take all the evidence to the proper authorities. In addition to losing his job, Fabian would face criminal charges. Fabian tried to fight, tried to argue, but he was cornered. The shareholders no longer had any doubt about who was telling the truth. Defeated, with no options left, Fabian signed his resignation that very day. But as he was leaving the conference room, he stopped beside Robert and whispered low enough for only his brother to hear, "You may have won today, but this isn't over. I'm going to take everything from you, starting with that woman and that child." Robert felt his blood run cold. Those weren't empty words. They were a promise, a real threat. That night, when he got home, he found Marianne and Sophia in the kitchen. The little girl was in her high chair, eating pieces of fruit. Marianne was preparing dinner, humming softly. It was such a normal, beautiful domestic scene that Robert felt his chest tighten. He had won the battle, but he knew the war was far from over, and now he had so much more to lose. It wasn't just his company, his reputation. It was this woman and this child. It was the future they were building together. It was everything that truly mattered. Marianne looked up and saw his expression. She immediately went to him. "What is it? What happened?" Robert hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "I'll tell you everything later, but right now I just need to be here, with you, to remember why all of this is worth it." And Marianne hugged him back, not yet knowing the dangers to come, only feeling that in that moment, in his arms, she was exactly where she needed to be. But the storm was approaching, and when it arrived, it would test everything they had built to its very limits. The months following Fabian's departure from the company were marked by a tense calm, like the strange silence that precedes a storm. Robert had increased security in the community, hired a discreet personal security guard to accompany Marianne and Sophia when they went out, and installed additional cameras around the property. It seemed like overkill, but Fabian's words echoed in his mind every night. Marianne noticed his concern, but Robert tried to shield her from it. She already had enough to worry about. She was adapting to her new position at the company, where she now coordinated the facilities team, managing everything from cleaning to the maintenance of all the buildings. It was a real responsibility, with a commensurate salary and a team under her command. For the first time in her life, she felt she had a career, not just a job. And there was their relationship. 3 months since that kiss on the porch, and every day brought a new discovery. Marianne learned that Robert liked to wake up early and read the newspaper with strong coffee, that he had a habit of organizing books by color, that he made silly faces at Sophia when he thought no one was looking, that he slept poorly on rainy nights because the sound reminded him of the hospital where Laura had passed away. Robert learned that Marianne sang in the shower when she was happy, that she was afraid of thunder but would never admit it, that she secretly read paperback romance novels, embarrassed to admit she liked sugary stories, that she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night to check if Sophia was breathing, a ritual she couldn't abandon even knowing the girl was safe. They were small things, everyday intimacies, but it was these small things that built real love. Sophia, in the meantime, continued to flourish. She had started to say a few words, something doctors had said might not happen. "Mama," "Uncle Rob," as she had started calling Robert, "Wawa," her attempt at water. Each new word was celebrated like a miracle because they were miracles, small and precious. The girl was also attending a special school Robert had found, a place with professionals trained to work with children on the autism spectrum. There, Sophia learned to socialize at her own pace, without pressure. She made friends. A girl named Julia who also didn't like loud noises, a boy named Peter who understood when she needed space. It was beautiful to see. Mrs. Celia visited every week, always bringing something: cake, cookies, a toy she saw and thought Sophia would like. She had become part of their extended family, the grandmother Sophia never had. And on a rainy Saturday afternoon, as they drank tea in the kitchen, she was the first to notice. "You're different," she said to Marianne, her sharp eyes studying the young woman's face. "There's something different about you today." Marianne blushed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do." Mrs. Celia smiled. "I've seen that glow before. My daughter had the same. One when she found out she was expecting. Are you pregnant?" Marianne nearly choked on her tea. No, I don't know, I don't think so. She paused. My period is a few weeks late, but it's always been irregular, so it doesn't mean anything. It means everything, Mrs. Celia said gently. When was the last time? Marianne thought. She and Robert had become intimate 2 months ago. They always used protection, but nothing was 100% guaranteed. The late period, the morning sickness she had attributed to stress, the tenderness in her breasts. Oh, God. You need to take a test, Mrs. Celia said. But I already know the result. I'm a mother, I can tell. That night after Sophia was asleep, Marianne took 3 pregnancy tests, all positive. She sat on the bathroom floor, the 3 tests spread around her, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Another baby. She was pregnant again. But this time was so different. She wasn't alone. She wasn't afraid. She had Robert. She had a home. She had stability. But still, the fear crept in. Fear that it was too much. Fear that Robert would run. Fear of messing everything up. Robert knocked on the door. Marianne, is everything okay? You've been in there for a while. She opened the door. He was in his pajamas, his hair tousled, his glasses crooked. He looked so normal, so human, so hers. And Marianne knew she had no choice but to trust. I'm pregnant, she said without preamble. Robert's face went through several expressions in a matter of seconds. Surprise, shock, and then, slowly, pure joy. Really? She showed him the tests. 3 times, really. Robert swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing. When he set her, back down, there were tears in his eyes. You're giving me another gift, another chance to be a father. I don't know what I did to deserve this. Are you sure? Marianne asked, her voice trembling. Isn't it too soon? We haven't been together that long. And with everything going on with Fabian, Robert held her face in his hands. Marianne Costa, listen to me. There's no right time, there's no perfect plan, but I know that I want to build a life with you. I know I want to marry you, have children with you, grow old with you, if you're willing to have me. It was a proposal, informal in the bathroom, surrounded by pregnancy tests. But it was perfect. Yes, Marianne whispered. Yes to everything. They kissed, and it was a kiss full of promises, of possible futures, of a love that had finally found its way. But not everyone was happy about that love. Fabian had spent the last few months planning, watching, waiting for the right moment. And when he found out through his contacts that Marianne was pregnant, that she and Robert were planning to get married, something inside him finally broke. He didn't want Sophia, he never had. But the idea of his brother raising that child, building the perfect family with the woman he had discarded, was unbearable. It was humiliating. It was unacceptable. So he did something desperate. He filed a lawsuit for custody of Sophia. He argued that Robert was manipulating Marianne, that the pregnancy was proof of an abusive relationship, that Sophia was being used as a pawn in their game. They were absurd, baseless allegations, but they were enough to trigger an investigation by Child Protective Services. When the social workers showed up at Robert's house to conduct an evaluation, Marianne felt her world crumble again. She answered all their questions, showed them Sophia's room, the school reports, the medical documents proving the girl's progress. But the fear was there, paralyzing. What if they thought she was unfit? What if they took Sophia away from her? Robert was furious. He hired the best lawyers, gathered witnesses, prepared a defense. But he was also scared. He knew the system. He knew that sometimes bureaucracy took on a life of its own, that justice wasn't always just. The process dragged on for weeks that felt like years. Hearings, psychological, evaluations, surprise visits. Marianne felt like she was living under a microscope. Every action scrutinized, every word weighed. The stress was affecting the pregnancy. She had some bleeding and was put on bed rest. Robert never left her side, torn between taking care of her and fighting his brother. It was Mrs. Celia who had the idea. One night, while making soup for Marianne, she spoke. "You're fighting with words, with papers. But Fabian doesn't care about that. He wants to hurt you, so show him that he can't hurt you anymore." "How?" Marianne asked. "By getting married, by becoming a real family officially, by making it clear that you are united and that nothing he does will change that." Robert looked at Marianne. She was pale, exhausted from the difficult pregnancy. But there was a determination in her eyes that he recognized. It was the same determination that had enabled her to raise Sophia alone for a year and a half, the same one that made her fight every day for a better life. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think we should have done this a long time ago," she replied. "Let's get married, let's show him, and the whole world that we are a family, and that nothing will tear us apart." They were married on a rainy Wednesday at the courthouse, with Mrs. Celia and their lawyer as witnesses. Sophia was there, wearing a little yellow dress Mrs. Celia had made, holding a small bouquet of daisies. When the official asked if Robert took Marianne to be his wife, the little girl shouted, "Yes!" so loudly that everyone laughed, even the stern-faced official. It was simple. It was perfect. It was theirs. The news of the wedding reached Fabian quickly. He was in the apartment. He had rented after being forced out of the company, surrounded by empty bottles and resentment. When he read about the wedding on social media, because Robert had posted a simple but beautiful photo of the three of them, something inside him finally gave way. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the realization that he had lost everything: the company, his family, his self-respect. Maybe it was seeing Sophia in that photo, smiling, clearly happy and loved, and realizing she was better off without him. Whatever the reason, Fabian dropped the lawsuit, not with dignity, not with an apology, just with a curt statement from his lawyer saying he was no longer interested in pursuing the matter. But it was enough. Marianne cried when she got the news. She cried with relief, with exhaustion, with gratitude. The threat was over. Finally, they could live in peace. The following months were the happiest of Marianne's life. The pregnancy progressed smoothly once the stress subsided. She and Robert turned one of the rooms into a nursery, with Sophia helping to choose colors and stuffed animals. The little girl was excited to be a big sister, even if she didn't fully understand what that meant. The baby was born on a clear spring morning, a healthy boy they named Peter after Robert's grandfather. Sophia met him at the hospital and, with the gentleness she always showed towards small things, touched his head with one finger. "My baby," she said clearly. It was one of the longest sentences she had ever spoken. "Our baby," Robert corrected gently, pulling Marianne and Sophia close. "Our family." And it was true. They were a family now. Unconventional, not perfect, but real and full of love. Mrs. Celia was there too, of course. She had become an honorary grandmother, always present, always ready with advice or soup or a hug when needed. She was the one who stayed with Sophia while Marianne was in labor, who brought the girl to meet her brother, who photographed that first moment of the family all together. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Robert found Marianne on the porch. It was the same place where they had first kissed. Sophia was playing in the garden with Peter in a playpen beside her, delighting in showing toys to her baby brother, who was still too small to appreciate them. "Remember when this all started?" Robert asked, hugging Marianne from behind. "How could I forget? The worst night of my life turned into the best thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't brought Sophia to work that night, if the door hadn't been locked, if she hadn't wandered out of the break room. So many coincidences." "They weren't coincidences," Marianne said softly. "It was fate. The universe pushing us to where we were meant to be. Together." Robert kissed her neck. "You've become a poet. You gave me time to become a poet. You gave me time to be more than just a survivor. You gave me the luxury of dreaming." They stood there for a while, just watching the children, the golden afternoon sun, the blooming garden. It was a domestic, ordinary scene, but for both of them, who had known loneliness and pain and despair, it was extraordinary. Sophia ran up to them just then, tugging on Robert's pants. "Daddy." She had started calling him that a few weeks ago, unprompted. "Daddy," Peter cried. It wasn't true. Peter was sleeping peacefully, but Robert went to check anyway because that's what fathers do. And Sophia followed him, a small protective shadow. Marianne watched them, her heart so full it ached. She thought of everything they had been through, the nights of despair, the constant fear, the humiliations, the threats. Had it been worth it? Every second of pain had led her here to this moment of perfect peace. Yes, it had been worth it. Because in the end, it wasn't just a child who found safety on that fateful night in the office building. It was a mother who discovered she didn't have to be strong alone. It was a man who learned that a broken heart can heal when it finds true love. It was a family that was formed not by blood, but by choice. And in the small break room on the 22nd floor where it all began, Mrs. Celia sometimes still had her coffee alone on her night shifts. She would look out the window at the illuminated city and smile. She had seen the beginning of that story. She had helped write a few chapters, and she knew with absolute certainty that the happy ending was real and lasting. Because some stories are born from chaos, some families are forged in fire, and true love, the kind that withstands storms and threats and doubts, doesn't need perfect moments to blossom. It just needs hearts willing to try, willing to trust, willing to believe that after the darkest night, the dawn always comes. And for Robert, Marianne, Sophia, and little Peter, the dawn had arrived, bright, warm, and full of the promise of happy days. Finally, they were home. Not a physical address, but that intangible place where the heart can rest, where there is no fear, where there is only love, and it was all they had ever needed. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marianne, Robert, and Sophia has touched your hearts deeply. If you were moved by this journey of resilience, love, and family, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it when Robert discovered the birthmark? When they kissed for the first time? Or perhaps when Sophia called Robert Daddy? Share your emotions with us. Every day we bring you intense and true stories like this one, revealing the deepest and most beautiful side of the human soul. Stories of struggle, of hope, of love that conquers all difficulties. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with another narrative that will stir your heart. Until then, remember, it's never too late to start over, never too late to love. And a true family is the one we choose to build together.